Welcome. You're on the Fringe Show. I'm your host, Tatiana Zalan, and I go live every Friday at 2 p.m. Dubai time. The Fringe helps you to navigate the rapidly changing world and increase the odds of your success. Here we discuss technology, startups, and mental models of successful people so that you too can take advantage of the opportunities in the new digital world. If you're like me, you're probably trying to figure out what our future will be like and what this means for humanity and for business specifically. In the post-pandemic world, I think many businesses are facing even greater uncertainty and unpredictability. One such uncertainty is the singularity, when by 2045, arguably, machine intelligence will surpass our own intelligence. Some executives and entrepreneurs have taken this idea as gospel, I find, without necessarily understanding that such singularity scenario is a forecast and rests on shaky grounds. I clearly remember a venture capitalist from Silicon Valley who once said that, while pointing to the exponential curve, which is at the heart of the singularity argument, he said that this exponential curve was probably the most important graph in the tech history. There is, of course, a Singularity University, and there are summits held on Singularity. Well, in this episode, which is number 52, I will dispel some myths around such singularity scenarios. And my hope is that executives and entrepreneurs don't make costly investment mistakes. A usual disclaimer before we go any further: the views here on the show are my own. They do not represent the official views of organizations and employers I'm associated with. It's not investment advice. The Fringe is only for educational purposes. Let's start with, what is singularity? Very quickly, probably familiar with this term. Well, it comes from a famous book, which was called The Singularity is Near, When Humans Transcend Biology. That was published in 2005 by Ray Kurzweil, who is an inventor, futurist, and at the time he was also director of engineering at Google. He famously embraced this concept of the singularity, the moment in time when machine intelligence will surpass our own human intelligence. He describes the law of accelerating returns, which predicts an exponential increase in technologies like computers, genetics, nanotechnology, robotics, and of course, artificial intelligence. Once the singularity has been reached, Kurzweil says that machine intelligence will be infinitely more powerful than all the human intelligence combined in the universe. Afterwards, he predicts that intelligence will radiate even outward from the planet until it saturates the whole universe. The singularity is also a point at which machines' intelligence and humans would merge, become inseparable, if you will. And so humans will become like transhumans. And Kurzweil predicted that this singularity will occur by 2045. Okay, so now that we understand what singularity is, let's move on to what concerns I have with all this argument and why I think it shouldn't be a basis for any kind of serious, maybe futures thinking, or it may be just an element of this this thinking, but it shouldn't be dominated, and that's for sure. Firstly, Kurzweil believes that forecasts which extrapolate these straight lines on linear trends are limiting, and instead we should be using an exponential function, which looks something like a J-stick. Entrepreneurs will be familiar with it because this is how they project growth in their own sales. So his reasoning is based on the law of accelerating returns and its derivatives, like Moore's law, for example, and it's also relying on mathematical functions rather than natural or physical laws. And I think it's a very, very important point to understand. These are really assertions about how past rates of scientific and technical progress can predict the future rate. Another futurist and physicist, Theodore Modis, said that nothing in nature follows a pure exponential. Explosive growth, including technological growth, can be best described by a logistic curve, which is really an S-shaped curve. Again, many entrepreneurs will be familiar with that too. And in fact, Kurzweil, in his work, uses double exponential. Firstly, it's increase in processor power. And it's also a decrease in the processor cost. Mathematically, the ratio of these two logistics is not necessarily a double exponent. Those of you who understand mathematics and statistics probably will agree with that. And the pattern can be used to make forecasts in any case only as long as it represents a natural law that guarantees that this tendency will continue invariably in future, or invariability is guaranteed, in other words. The law here is a logistic curve, an S-curve. It's natural law. And Kurzweil himself admits that at some point in his book that there are always limits, and eventually his exponential curves will also turn into S-curves, although it will take a long time. And then he quickly jumps back to the idea of the exponential curve. Of course, the most important point and most important argument here is, where are we on this curve? In other words, where is the knee, the point at which the pattern begins to appear explosive? Modis himself took 3 examples for which the data are readily available and non-controversial: world population, oil production, and the celebrated Moore's Law. And because many people would be familiar with Moore's Law, particularly entrepreneurs, well, let's take this example. Moore's Law is really the position of the exponential knee translates into 3% of the S-curve ceiling. So there is a knee, and then there is a ceiling, and this knee is 3% of that ceiling. And in fact, many technologists would now argue these days that Moore's Law has reached the end of its S-curve, and something else, some new technology, new breakthrough needs to happen. So between the level of this exponential knee and the level of the ceiling of the S-curve, there's a factor of less than 100 for microprocessors. So in sum, what actually does that mean? Well, in sum, it's highly unlikely that a singularity of the Kurzweil type will ever be achieved. So that's the point about natural laws and the laws of physics. What about other problems with this argument, my concerns with Kurzweil's argument? Well, the law of accelerating returns applies to hardware. And for the law to apply and the singularity to occur by 2045, as predicted, we need advances not only in hardware, like memory, processing power, but also in the software so that we can run more capable computers. And according to Paul Allen, who is the founder of Microsoft, we can't just run today's computer software faster. We need to build smarter and more capable software programs. And creating this type of advanced software will require a prior scientific understanding of the foundations of human cognition. And we're far, far away from this understanding. We've just begun to scrape the surface. We need to know, for example, the structure of the brain, how it reacts and changes, how billions of neurons interact, and so on. It's not impossible, and one day we may indeed understand how a human brain works. But if the singularity is going to occur by this predetermined deadline, 2045, then we require a really massive acceleration of our scientific progress in understanding every facet of the human brain. So we need a major breakthrough in neuroscience. And the complexity of the human brain, as I'm sure you will know, is mind-boggling. Every structure and neural circuit that has been really precisely shaped by evolution, by millions of years of evolution, as well as environmental conditions, and it does one particular thing. If you look at computers, well, computers are standardized. There are billions of identical transistors in regular memory sets controlled by CPUs and just really a few different elements. They're standardized. In order to create an adequate simulation of the real ongoing neural activity of the organism, which Kurzweil plans to do, hopes to do, you also need a really vast amount of knowledge about the functional role that these neurons play, how their connection patterns evolve, how they're structured into groups, and how this neural information processing ultimately affects an organism's behavior. That's according to Paul Allen. And without this information, it's been proven impossible to construct effective computer-based simulation models, especially for the cognitive neuroscience of humans. We're really not close at all to the required level of functional knowledge. But neuroscience is a bottom-up approach to scientific progress and process, and it's very, very slow. What about AI? How can we get around this slow process? And AI is really at the heart of the argument in Kurzweil's work. Overall, AI-based capabilities haven't been exponentially increasing either, at least when we measure them against the creation of a fully general human intelligence. The equivalent of that is AGI, artificial general intelligence, as opposed to artificial narrow intelligence. Ben Goertzel is perhaps one of the best experts in the area of AI today. He's a computer scientist and has been working in this area for a very long time. And he sees this the future of AGI, artificial global intelligence, as a big, hard, and complicated issue. And no one, he says, can sensibly claim to know that something is going to happen because there is irreducible uncertainty. And the scenario that Kurzweil envisions is essentially that AGI is achieved by scanning human brains, figuring out the nature of human thought from these scans, and then replicating human brain functions on powerful computer hardware rather than software. And this existence of this powerful computer hardware is, of course, predicted by Moore's law and its siblings. But by the same token, we know that we are reaching the ceiling with Moore's law as well. So this human-like AGI will be, according to Kurzweil, integrating richly with human society. So it's not going to be us versus them, I mean machines, but rather a situation in which the boundary between us and machines is fluid and evolving and sometimes even impossible to define. And instead of thinking about singularity as something deterministic, and this is what Ben Goertzel says, it's more useful to think about a range of possible scenarios. For example, we can see steady incremental progress. We can see a dead end when a narrow AI makes progress but doesn't lead to artificial general intelligence. Then we can have artificial general intelligence-based singularity. We can have some sort of a doom and gloom dystopian Skynet scenario and so on and so forth. So one of these scenarios could well be the Kurzweil singularity. Kurzweil is particularly enthusiastic about this human brain emulation, human brain interface, and it's obviously not the only possible path to AGI, and it's not necessarily even the very first path that succeeds. So I think we could side with Goertzel in saying that the most likely future is one in which the human-level AGI is first achieved through integrative methods, synthesizing insights from computer science, but also from cognitive science, and maybe even some other disciplines. We cannot just simply emulate the human brain. That's key to Goertzel's argument. And I very much agree with Goertzel on this point. He says about Kurzweil's work, which is actually he's thinks very highly of it, but also sees some limitations. He says that I do tend to feel that Kurzweil underestimates the uncertainty involved in predicting the future of complex open systems like human societies and the scientific and technological development taking place within them. The tendency of the human mind toward overconfidence is well researched and well documented in the cognitive psychology community. And in reading Kurzweil's book, it's hard to escape the feeling that in spite of the rigor of his data analytic procedures, he has succumbed to this tendency to a certain extent. And let's make a final point on the rigor of the scientific procedures. That's quite telling as well. What about the quality and reliability of the data that's been used to make the argument? The graphs that are crucial for the singularity argument come from two articles by Theodore Modis. Modis himself admits that they come from 14 sets of milestones in the evolution of the universe, and some of these sets are not independent, and you have to have independent data sets, right? And some data are very weak by their origin. For example, it could have been an assignment posted by a biology professor on the internet, and the link has been broken. Only one data set, and that's Sagan's cosmic calendar, covers the Big Bang to the internet series with dates. So one data set. And Kurzweil doesn't seem to check the quality of the data, claiming that he has evidence from 15 independent sources, which is certainly not the case. And finally, a few of my takeaways for executives and entrepreneurs based on our this show and the ideas that have been flagged here tonight. As a hard-nosed executive, be sure to understand the difference between forecasts, projections, between facts and laws. Singularity is not a natural law. It's not a theory. It's a forecast. It's a projection based on past observations, and it's extremely dangerous to extrapolate past data into the future if you don't have a good theory or an understanding of natural laws. Theodore Modis describes it as a cultish idea which presents a far-fetched forecast as a fact. It has to do more with science fiction than actual science. All exponential curves, and the singularity curve is no exception, one day become S-curves. And this is a more natural pattern of evolution of anything biological and anything computers as well. Future is not singular or deterministic, that's how I think about it. There is always a place for human agency. And rather than considering singularity as something totally inevitable, it's useful, I think, just like Goetzel does, to develop various scenarios where the Kurzweil singularity could be one of the scenarios and could be one of the uncertainties that you need to maybe account for, but don't take it as gospel. Generally, scenarios are a powerful way of thinking about certain futures. They break the assumption that the future can be predicted. And most importantly, don't make investment decisions based on such forecasts. It's quite dangerous for your company. Well, thank you for joining me today. I hope you've learned something new about the singularity. So that's just one possible options, versions of the future. And certainly do your own research and your own thinking, most importantly. Well, you will see me again in a week's time on Friday at 2 p.m. Dubai time.